Forbes Books presents The Great Digital Transformation with Gerard Zatvani, highlighting the pioneers that reimagined possibilities and reimagined businesses. Gerry and I are excited to welcome Georg Ell, the CEO of Phrase, to the podcast. With over 17 years leading high-tech growth companies like Phrase and Tesla, Georg has an outstanding track record of scaling organizations during periods of rapid change. He now oversees 300-plus employees at Phrase, a global leader in localization technology, serving top clients like Uber and Shopify. Georg, welcome to the Great Digital Transformation.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Oh, you're very welcome. And so, Georg, I know we have much to get to, and we're recording this in November of 2023. Yep, 2023. And we're about the one-year anniversary that ChatGPT was unleashed to the world. So basically 365 days after the world changed with ChatGPT. And Gerry and I like to joke on this podcast that AI ain't new. It's been around for a long time, but it has definitely taken a hold of the attention of the public from the mainstream to Silicon Valley. So 1 year into ChatGPT introducing itself to the world, initial thoughts. What are you thinking about AI going mainstream?
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? Listeners may be listening back to this later, of course, but we are 1 year in from the sort of launch of GPT 3.5, but we're also about 72 hours, the whole thing nearly imploding after the board tried to oust Sam Altman and then sort of discovered that didn't work out so well for them. And we're still, I think, waiting to see exactly how that all shakes out. So it shows, I think, a bunch of extraordinary things. I mean, like, frankly, one of the most astounding things about it is the resurgence of Microsoft. You know, I used to work at Microsoft. My first 5 years of my career were 2006 to 2011. Steve Ballmer, you know, I remember that Microsoft was not always seen as this like amazingly innovative company. And if you would have said that the world's foremost, arguably, entrepreneur who certainly had the choice of anywhere they could have possibly gone would choose to go to Microsoft, that's sort of amazing to see that happen. Now, like maybe more on the subject of AI, I would say it's been extraordinary, transformative, exciting. And for people like us at Phrase, we're a language technology business. It's kind of put us on the front of people's mind and thinking. You know, language technology wasn't necessarily something that every member of the C-suite was thinking about until GPT suddenly made sure that in fact, yes, every member of the C-suite is now thinking about language technology in one way, shape, or form. So that's been pretty exciting. And I think it's early days.
And for the C-suite folks that may be listening, language technology, break that down for us, Georg.
Yeah. So it's, one of the things that's interesting about it is that there's a lot of language technology and there's many sort of, layers to it. What we do at Phrase is we provide software that assists companies, including the very largest companies in the world. People like Uber is one of our customers. I always forget which ones I'm allowed to talk about publicly and not. But Shopify is another one that I'm allowed to say out loud. Zendesk is another one I'm allowed to say out loud. But there's like hundreds of amazing brands. You will have used our software if you've used any of those technologies or many others like them. And maybe you've traveled abroad or you are a consumer of one of those technologies, not in the language in which it's written. So those companies will use technologies from Phrase to translate their website, their apps, their content, generally speaking, whether it's digital content or even documentation, into all of the different languages of their employee base, of their user base, and the markets that they're in, or the diaspora markets, the many languages that are spoken within their markets, whether that is the US or, a European country or anywhere else in the world. And we do that with a combination of AI, and we've actually been doing that for about 5 years. To your point around this isn't entirely new. And we're, of course, accelerating our investments there. We also do it through highly complex and configurable workflows, and we do it at tremendous scale. So even the, like gaming organizations who have just incredible volumes of content that needs to be localized can do that on our platform. So that's the role we play in that.
Awesome. And Gerry, you're Mr. Worldwide. You travel all over the world working with tech companies all over the planet. Before we get into the nitty gritty here, give me your take, Gerry, on these language technology companies like Phrase.
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting technology, and it's basically embedded in a lot of platforms. As you say, we are using it, and we don't even know we are using it. I think now it's becoming very common to have translations on demand into whatever language, and things are pretty decent. Like the results are becoming really good, and at the point where you don't even realize that it's really a translation. And this makes a huge difference for people that are traveling or within country. You have countries where there are a lot of minorities. I just think about Switzerland, where you have 4 official languages and how they have to talk to each other, or European Union, where you have 27 official languages or more, I guess. It's quite complicated to manage all of these conversations moving from one language to another. And the more the technologies improve, the better this communication will happen, and it is going to become more seamless. So I'm curious, Georg, how is this AI? How did you think about this? When at the beginning, when you said, well, I need to invest in this, why did you do it? What was the main reason that pushed you forward on this?
So translation as an industry is probably one of the oldest industries. Thousands of years we've been translating, and for 99.9% of that history, it's been a service performed predominantly by human beings. And that's actually extraordinarily still true today, that it is predominantly done by human beings. But in the last few years, we have seen machine translations, or let's say machines doing translating, increasingly. And so what you've seen, for example, is people talk about a pyramid of high stakes, high value content, which is exclusively done by human translation. And then at the bottom of the pyramid, perhaps higher volume, low value, low stakes, lower risk content, which is potentially done predominantly by machines. And you might imagine you could look at, for example, user-generated content could be down the bottom, or if you buy a piece of cheap electronics from the internet and it comes with a manual, and you can just about make out the English. I mean, it is pretty terrible, but you kind of get it, but it's good enough, right? So that would be sort of low stakes. Now, I think slowly been happening is that the ability of machines to translate, and actually, rather than translate, I should use the term localize, which means something a little different. We could define it. But the ability of machines to localize content increasingly has just sort of been rising up this pyramid. And I think one of the things that we think is interesting is as it rises up that pyramid, of course, it makes it more affordable as well for organizations to do more of that localization, and then opens up a lot of new use cases. And some of that might be interesting to explore too. So as I say, we've been doing it for about 5 years, in a particular way to try and help organizations actually be able to select from a range of different engines that are out there. And then more recently, we've been building some of our own technology, as well as supporting all these third-party engines. And I just think what's happening with LLMs, that it is it's enabling for more creativity, perhaps more expression, perhaps more emotion to become part of the machine, the ability of machines to localize content really effectively. And of course, how you do that specifically with really high quality and reliability is still important. We happen to be kind of an enterprise type company, and enterprises have a relatively lower kind of risk tolerance for freewheeling your language, which can otherwise get them into all sorts of trouble. I'll give you an example. Actually, it's a funny one, sort of funny. An airline, I won't say which one. I don't want to embarrass anybody, but there was an airline recently that translated the food in first class as if they were serving dog food, as in like roast dog, and that was not their intention. But low quality translation can have sometimes hilarious consequences.
Wow. I'm curious in terms of your evolution of AI. You said you've been using it for about 5 years. My worry now is that people are going to be like, all right, now we got this thing. Is it going to get any better? Is it going to get smarter? How has yours evolved from when you started to where you are now? Because now the way I've taken it as a consumer is like, okay, this is great. The Claude and the Bards of the world, they're pretty good. ChatGPT, I think it's up to 4 now. But where does it go from here? Like, is it just get a little bit smarter incrementally? So I just want to try to get a gauging to the context as to how you evolved over 5 years and how we are going to sort of work with AI over the next 5 years.
Yeah. I'll answer the question around us, and then sort of broaden it to some of the wider points as well, because they're interesting. But in our case, we started with, and then have for a long time provided this kind of aggregation service. So there's a whole range of different third-party machine translation engines from the likes of Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and others that we have enabled through our platform for customers to be able to use to localize, translate a piece of content. And then what we've done is provided an AI, which is an auto-select, where we analyze the content to understand the type of content it is. Is it a legal document or a technical document? We then look at the language pair, so you're going from English to German, for example. And then we say for that content type and that language pair, this particular engine is the best engine to use at this point in time, because over, on any given day or week, like one engine is better for that combination, but maybe the following week it's actually a different engine. And then we analyze that. And what we've found, and we publish studies on this roughly once a quarter, we found that if you do the auto selection, you get on average a 15% improvement in quality in the output. So the auto selection has been quite important. And then we do some quality assessment as well. We've done that in I'm going to say kind of an effective way, but in a way that we're investing a lot to make more effective. So I'm going to call it rudimentary, although that's doing it down, but we're investing a lot to make quality even more effective. Now, quality turns out to be a really important piece of this puzzle. We actually just hired a gentleman called Dr. Alain Levy. He's the world expert on quality. He invented the COMET score, which is the sort of universally accepted best practice standard for assessing machine translation quality. And if you can incorporate quality into the process and have a consistent way of scoring that throughout, then you can start to build some really sophisticated iterative loops of quality where you involve different combinations of ML models, machine translation engines, large language models at every stage, from assessing the source to looking at the outputs with the right engines, to then maybe automatically making improvements, maybe running that through the sort of cycle 2 or 3 times. And then at the end, you kind of spit out to human review on a by exception basis. And so all of that, to my earlier point, drives unit economics down, which means volumes can grow. So we're not predicting the end by any stretch of the imagination of humans in the loop, but a percentage of a greater volume that they will review is probably smaller. Now, so that's us. That's kind of our evolution from auto selection of other engines to, well, I didn't say it. Now we have our own engine as well, and we've built the ability for people to create custom engines in, I'm underselling this. We just released custom AI. So this is the ability to generate your own custom model off a data set in a few hours. That's work that would historically have taken weeks or months. So we've dramatically changed the ability for an organization to create multiple custom models. So you might have one for your legal team. You might have one for your marketing team. Kind of cool stuff like that. So the bigger picture one is interesting. I think there's been this fantastic hype cycle, particularly since GPT-4, where in the immediate aftermath, at Christmas with 3.5 was a parlor trick. I was showing parents at my school Christmas tricks, like, look, I can get it to write romantic sonnets, in seconds, like stuff I could never come up with myself. In March, suddenly it felt like this was an enterprise application, and the implications seemed like limitless, and the potential was limitless, and we were all going to, jobs were sort of immediately going to be disrupted or disappear, and I think there was a little tailspin around this in some sense, like overhyping. And then, of course, what's happened is everyone's calmed down a bit and realized that, in fact, it still needs a tremendous amount of review. You have to get your prompts right. Actually, there's a real skill to being a phenomenal prompt engineer. That's not a skill everybody has. It's actually quite a technical skill if you want to make the most of it. So, we haven't suddenly done away with armies of skilled people. In fact, we've given them this amazing sort of superpower. The output can grow, productivity can grow. That's good for the economy. It's good for all of us as long as it's properly controlled and used. And to your point around, does it just get kind of better and better and better? Well, interestingly, not always. Actually, sometimes it gets worse. And like even GPT-4 has over time gone from giving correct answers to incorrect answers to the same prompt, or decreasing its scores against standardized tests in some categories, even when it's improving on others. So these things are so dynamic and so fluid that they aren't just like straightforward. Now, last thing I'd say, what has super impressed me is the multimodality of GPT. So I took a picture. I'm on like a sort of diet, and the other day one of our friends came around with a sugary bun. And so I snapped a photograph of it, and I knew which shop it was from. And I said, what is this? It's from this shop. And it then correctly identified exactly what it was. So it's a stupid example, but like from a photograph and a little bit of text information. Or the other day, I gave it a picture of a weather forecast. But here's 2 points here. Picture of a weather forecast. I said, what is this information? And it accurately and very, very detailed summarized it.
Wow.
5 minutes later, I wanted to show my wife, and I did the same thing again, exactly the same thing, and it gave me a different and worse answer. Hey, 5 minutes ago, this was really cool.
Yeah, the challenge is to build in reliability. How do you make things enterprise grade? At enterprise grade, you cannot have this kind of things. You cannot flip flop on an answer from one day to another and suddenly have things be worse than before. I think also maybe this is just maybe using multiple AIs. You mentioned machine learning with LLMs working together and customizing, fine-tuning an LLM. These are I think very important steps, and as you mentioned, even with prompt building, it requires quite a lot of understanding of how do you do that in the right way in order to get you to the right result. So while using a ChatGPT is very nice and it's very kind of inspiring and it creates a lot of hype and everything, in an enterprise environment, I think you need to go through multiple checks and balances in order to give you a solid, consistent answer that also needs to be reviewed by a human. Because I don't believe in AI doing things by itself. There has to be a human somewhere in the loop that's supervising and double checking.
Yeah, I think that is true. I think the threshold condition might start to change for that over time, but I do think it's true that there will be humans in the loop, and not least because if you ask a generative AI to create a piece of content in 50 languages, it can do it natively, right? So in the past, you would have had maybe, let's say, for example, someone in marketing briefing a writer and say, this is the sort of thing I want you to write, and then the writer would write it in one language. The marketing person would then review that, maybe make some changes, etc. But it would then get kind of locked before it went to translation. With generative AI, you've still got the marketing person giving the brief. They're giving it to a machine. The machine will then generate something, and you might tweak it and then brief it again. But if you say, generate this in 50 languages at source, that marketing person has no way to review the other 49 languages that he or she, possibly doesn't understand. And so you need a way then of, and this is where the quality piece is so important, of scoring these things in a reliable way. And then you still need to do some sampling. And we're not even talking about regulated industries, of course. That's another, workflow, another example of where workflow is important. But you still need to do quality scoring, sampling. And the challenge, of course, with machines is if they make a mistake, they make them very fast and at scale. And if that propagates, then, enterprises have problems. So this is where the three big bets for us are AI, workflow, and scale. Because you got all the complexity you got to manage, and the pace at which it happens is insane. I have a theory for what's going to happen to the internet. We can talk about it.
I would be curious to understand how do you see this the double checking of translations done for legal industry or some very highly how they say in Italian. I'm not sure if you speak Italian or they have traduttore, traditore, which means translator. It's also a traitor. It's kind of a very wordplay on traduttore, traditore. Translation done wrong, it can be a big mess.
Well, do you know what? I listened to a podcast a year ago or so, which was making the case that when books are translated into multiple languages, that actually the person who has done the translation should get almost as much credit as the original author, because that translator can transform the original content into something beautiful or something ugly, depending on their skill set and their understanding of the original text. So and if you speak to human translators, they will remind you of this. It's not like a simple mathematical thing where there's a correct answer in every case. So the legal one is interesting though, because actually contracts, whilst yes, of course, on the one hand have extraordinary importance on precision, on the other hand, they are often quite structured and there often are defined terms. And that does allow for machine translation to actually be quite effective sometimes, because it isn't poetry, it's prose, and structured prose. So we actually have someone who joined us recently who gave an example from the company that he worked at previously, which was a major global international bank, a European bank, and they actually built a custom AI. It took them months and months and months to do it, something that they could now with the modern technology do in just a few hours, but they built a custom AI for, I think, sales and marketing. And then one day he was having coffee with one of the legal team, and the legal team said, it doesn't work for us. And he said, I'll make one for you. Send me some sample data. So that happened. And then the punchline of the story was that sometime later, the chief legal officer of this global, I shouldn't, but you would very respected global brand, many countries. The chief legal officer, who had never met this individual, wrote him unprompted an email just to say, thank you, this has been incredible. So that, even over the last few years, kind of manually hand-cranked a custom machine translation engine can be very effective in a legal context. I think one of the even more challenging ones is anything to do with sort of medicines, for example, in healthcare, and the European Union. But that's its own story.
You mentioned about the future of the internet. What's your theory? You intrigued me with that comment.
Yeah, so I listen to a lot of podcasts. So I was listening to a podcast, and it got me thinking about gaming and the fact that, and I don't have time, sadly, to play many games anymore, but I used to love playing computer games and these sort of big roaming open world games where you interact with these non-player characters. And oftentimes when you do that, you're given a selection of choices, and you can choose one of three things. And depending on the choice, the game evolves and your character evolves and so on. And in a way, it's just like the old books from when I was a nerdy teenager. The sort of, if you want to do this, go to page 72, and then there's
choose your own adventure. Yeah,
super cool. I was thinking, actually, this is an amazing opportunity for generative AI to actually create natural conversation. It could be much more reactive, whilst if you gave it some guidelines, I'm still steering the conversation in accordance with the game author's vision for, what the next step should be. So I thought, okay, well, if it could be gaming, where else can it be? And anyway, long story short, I started to imagine the whole internet effectively being something that could be streamed in real time. So the canonical example, or the example I've often given is, imagine going to Nike.com, and you could go to that website today, all three of us could go, and assuming we were all in the English language, we would probably see quite similar content, maybe with some variation for our location or the device type, but like basic. But if all three of us went again in half an hour and again half an hour later, and just kept going to Nike.com, it would be the same, right? It wouldn't fundamentally change. But there's no reason that has to be true necessarily in 5 years' time, because if you have all the right inputs and outputs, and the system understands something about each of us, if it understands the supply chain of Nike, its current distribution, what events are going on in the world, which athletes have recently done something interesting, like all of these real-time kind of factors, then the entire content of that web browsing experience could be streamed in real time. And that, I think, becomes quite profound, because it takes the concept of personalization to, plaid. It's like hyper personalization. It also has implications for content. So that pyramid I talked about earlier, the sort of high stakes, low volume content that only humans touch, actually suddenly the base doesn't get any less narrow, but the top explodes out. And not by 10x or 100x, but like a billion X, like a sort of astronomical X explosion of just the number of words and the content and the complexity. So to the earlier point around the machine can generate something at speed, but then remembering that the enterprise has a tone of voice, it has kind of safety requirements. There are things it shouldn't say. And all of that can happen, without any possibility of human intervention, right? Because it's real time. So suddenly that pyramid totally explodes out. And hence our 3 pillars of AI, workflow, and scale, because we're working towards a vision to try and enable that for the enterprise. And we could be really wrong and still be directionally and sufficiently correct, right? If it's not a billion X explosion, it's just 1,000X. that's okay. That's like good, and like we're still headed in the broadly correct direction. And interestingly, I've floated that kind of concept past some of the bigger content companies, and they've broadly agreed with that vision as well. But I think not every company will do. And so one of the bits of advice we give kind of not just localization teams, but all of the VPs and all the C-suite is like talk to each other and talk to your partners and your providers about what is their 5-year vision, and are you all getting kind of ready for that? Because this is kind of S-curve exponential change. So those who are slow will find that they are like behind others. If Nike is hyper personalized in real time, and we all know that competitors are not, then like it'll be a very effective tool for them. So that's the sort of 5-year vision of the internet that we work towards.
Well, let's get into a couple of Gerry's passion projects here: digital transformation and the future of work. So let's start with digital transformation. It's kind of a running joke that we have on this podcast where we ask the guests to define what digital transformation is. And you've been in tech for quite a while. Not to age you, Georg, but it's been almost 20 years. Digital transformation blew up in the last 5 years. That term became very much normal vernacular for folks in the tech industry and even in business. How would you define what digital transformation is?
I'm sure we were using that term when I started as well. And I think Bill Gates wrote a book before I left university called Business at the Speed of Light or something like that, which I've not read it, but I think famously actually missed the internet. So people were talking about digital transformation even before like the internet effectively became well understood. So I think it's a perennial term that is largely a productivity term. It's about being able to do more with less, to walk around with a supercomputer. In fact, if you look up the definition of a cyborg, it's essentially a human being that has been augmented with technology. Well, I can tell you, I'm rarely more than like an arm's length away from this device. Even when I'm sleeping, it's next to me. And I'm afraid I don't follow any of the good sleep advice. It is the first thing I look at in the morning and the last thing at night. But I also read on it. I socialize on it. I shop on it. I like all sorts. So
You're a cyborg.
yeah, like it just, and if this was implanted under my skin as opposed to not, would it really make any difference to my experience? Like, I didn't really think so. So, I think digital transformation is largely about productivity and being able to do ever more. And that's exciting.
Gerry, how would you grade his description there? What would you grade Georg as his description of digital transformation there?
It's a good one. It's a good one. I think for me, it's also about dreaming new ways of doing business just by using technology. Nowadays, like look at ChatGPT. It opens up new ways, new ideas, new avenues to actually transform your business, to do it in a different way, to do it better. I think there is a lot that we can do, and many times we just don't dare to reimagine the processes that we have in our businesses. To kind of like, okay, well, what if, and what's next? It's we are kind of putting ourselves into a box and like, have hard time coming out of it. I think like the biggest problem with innovation is adoption. Is people actually giving it a try? People actually playing it with something new and trying something new. What I was really surprised is to how resistant are people to change. Like once you have your set ways of doing things, you don't necessarily want to change that. You like it like that. You're in your comfort zone.
I think on the transformation topic as well, isn't it? It's just a sort of truism that there are so many new jobs invented, not just created, but like invented that didn't exist before. And that has been true every 5 years, probably since the transistor came along. And so that's, I think that also speaks to the transformation part. And your point, Gerry, about we can't even imagine perhaps the capabilities, or I think I'm right in saying that when Steve Jobs kind of approved the design for this, he initially resisted the concept of an app store. So, even Steve Jobs couldn't imagine the potential of his own creation.
That's pretty cool. All right, and the second passion of Gerry's, Georg, is the future of work. If we all remember the beginnings of 2020, every tech company known to man was very altruistic and very a very team focused of like, we're going to be totally 100% remote work. Everybody just go home or work wherever you want. You don't have to live in Northern California. You can move wherever you want. And then all of a sudden, 2 years later, like, oh yeah, remember that whole thing about you guys staying at home and work? No, we want you all back in the office because we feel productivity is not the same. So talk to me about how you view the future of work as a CEO of a tech platform. Maybe give us a little context in terms of like how you handle things in the last couple of years in terms of remote work and where you see that going.
Yeah, so it's interesting. At Braze, we are about 340 people in 28 countries. We have 2 big offices and a small one in Pittsburgh, and then a medium-sized one in Hamburg and a big one in Prague. And I'm in the UK. Probably half the C-suite are in the UK. I have colleagues on my team in Barcelona, Berlin, Prague, and dotted around the UK. So we are.
So you don't believe in remote work? It sounds like you're not on.
Yeah. So, but I have mixed feelings. Because it has lots of benefits. The benefit of kind of structure. So meetings tend to start on time, finish on time. I think more of our remote meetings run with agendas. We use a particular piece of software called Fellow to run the agendas for our meetings. That's been very effective, and we capture actions out of that. So we bring a lot more structure to a lot of our work. Also, the fact of being remote in a multilingual organization, because the 28 countries, is requiring us to get better at the discipline of writing things down and actually taking the time to do pre-work, pre-reading, and then write, just using the written word as a way of making sure everyone's clear about things. In a more effective and disciplined way. I think that's been sort of a good discipline that we've had to learn, and we're still getting better and better at that. And so there are really significant benefits. And I think also through COVID, everyone worked incredibly hard, and part of that, and it drove a level of exhaustion, I think, as well. And I think, and not just at Braze, I mean, in companies generally, I watched my wife work and how hard, she's a lawyer, and the law firms worked unbelievably hard through that period. And perhaps it was because there was nothing else to do, in the lockdowns and so on. I don't think companies necessarily didn't mean it in that sense. I think people have started to maybe value different things. And part of that is, of course, time with family and hobbies and all that. But part of it is also time with colleagues. And I've noticed, particularly in the last year, that people really value time with colleagues as well. And that suddenly, without me, sort of enforcing anything or an agenda as such, people are coming to me and saying, how can we find more time and more opportunity to be together in person? And so our office in Prague is 99% whiteboard to enable, that to happen super easily. And I was there the other day and we had product and engineers from around the world in the office, and the energy and the excitement, the kind of music of ideas flowing was completely infectious. And so, I have mixed feelings about it. I think there are benefits to the 2 styles of work, and what we're all having to learn as leaders and managers is how to make a hybrid model more effective. And we don't have the luxury, and I don't think it's in our culture either, to just kind of 3-line whip mandate. That's it. Everyone has to move house, get closer to the office, and come in again. So we're learning the difficult discipline of hybrid leadership.
You need way more structure, way more discipline. You need way more governance. This structure, discipline, and governance in the way you do meetings, in the way you interact with people, needs to be very structured. I mean, you don't have those water cooler kind of conversations that can be very meaningful, but those are not unstructured or not planned, and they exclude the people that are not around the water cooler. These are things that need to be done intentionally. You need to really plan it and think about it. You cannot just leave it, to happen by chance, like the way you would do it when if you would have everybody in the office, then you would go from one to another, and you would figure out everything just like that, just because you are around. But in a remote environment, you cannot do that. And that's, it applies also to hybrid, because for hybrid, what you also need to plan is you need to actually plan for interaction, for on-site human interaction. You need to build that into your process. Like you will have moments where you are remote, and you have moments that you are actually on-site, and those have to be scheduled, because If you have two people coming in and the others will not, then what's the point of having half of your team on site and then whoever not being there? So these things, planning is probably a very strong keyword for this to work well.
And I have a question for both of you. So I have a take on this, in my opinion, that I feel like technology has destroyed office culture. If you work for a company that's just knowledge workers, and you gentlemen probably know this, when you walk into that room, say it's a bullpen or offices, everyone has earbuds on and they're staring at a screen. So my question to you both is, how do you have an office culture when you don't even know you can say hello to someone because you don't know if they're in the middle of a Teams or Google Meet, or they're in the middle of a project because they've got earbuds on and they're staring at a screen? So how do we foster this world of collaboration and people hanging out by the water cooler when we're so attached to the technology we're using to create whatever we're doing production-wise? So Georg, start with that, because I from a personal experience, I'll walk into my office, I don't know if I could say hi to anyone because they're in the middle of something. So what's the point of me being there if I can't say hi to someone? As simple as that sounds. Georg?
Yeah, I agree. Do you know what? Interestingly, I had this idea a while ago that one should create a set of headphones that is linked to your status and has a light on it. So if it's a red light, you're in a call. If it's a green light, you're like listening to music or something, like a traffic light sort of thing. And then there's also, I think it depends a little bit on the nature of the work that's going on and the types of people. So I remember about a year ago, I walked into an office in Hamburg with our team there. And there was one of our chaps. I can't remember if he was wearing headphones or not, but I sort of like walked into this room and I said hi, and I thought he would kind of stop what he was doing and say hi, because A, that's a normal human interaction, and B, for what it's worth, the CEO is saying hello. So anyway, the reaction was interesting. He said, "Oh, I'm in deep flow. And so I sort of tiptoed backwards out of his room, and I was like, "Okay, I'll come back." It was very odd. So some of it is, I think, knowing when you do need to respect that, because actually, like particularly engineers, I think often will talk about being in flow and sort of deep thinking time, and it's valuable. They need that space. And I think so. Some of it's in office design and creating spaces where actually, like, that's a quiet space. One of my friends in his office has designed a library. And they have a rule of no electronics, so they just have books, and they come in with a pen and paper and sync. So you can do some creative things with office design, and maybe where people choose to be, might be an indication of like what they're doing and all the rest of it. Some of it is in culture, which is like we don't do that around here, and that's true of so many types of behaviors. And then to, Gerry's point earlier, I think some of it is about curating moments of connection. So maybe that's like a breakfast. And, we don't sort of follow the Silicon Valley theory of throwing like 3 free meals per day at everybody, but we do a weekly breakfast for the team, and they love it. And it's a great moment. So I think it's a combination.
You need to schedule the coffee break. You need to know that at 10:15 there will be a coffee break. A lunch will be at noon. And then there will be an after hour at 5 p.m. where everybody comes together and has, a drink or whatever. When these things are scheduled, people kind of come together, they gather, they talk. And then you have this balance about, leave me alone, I'm working. And then, there is a moment and a place, like in the kitchen or whatever, where people kind of come together at a set time when they know that 10:15, everybody will kind of come together in the kitchen, we'll have coffee, we'll chit-chat, and then go back to work.
But Gerry, that supports my argument, because a CEO will say, I want my people running into each other and having spontaneous meetings. That's not sound very spontaneous, Gerry, if you're scheduling coffee and lunch and breakfast and meetings.
I'm not that CEO. I would not support like having this kind of very super spontaneous kind of office culture that isn't. It's not happening anymore. Those times are gone. It's just not there. I do believe that you need to have local interaction and everything, but it's not going to happen the same way it happened 20 years ago, especially in our space. People that are very creative and they have their own ways of working.
it's an interesting idea. The sort of school bell goes off and everyone streams out of class and, meets in the canteen. I mean, it could work, but it's an experiment I haven't run yet. But one of the things I think is valuable is like some very basic analog things like posters on walls can actually be incredibly meaningful. So I'll give you an example. We run an employee engagement survey every 90 days, completely anonymous. We have about 92% participation. Very detailed survey with like 600 comments every time. I read every single one 3 times and respond to about 100 of them, all anonymous. And it's like really valuable data. We ask the same questions every quarter so we can track it over time. One of the ways we turn that into meaningful action is we ask every team to come up with at least one improvement as a result of it, no more than 5, at least one. And the thing I miss in this company, which we did in my last company, was that I said to people, I want you to write it on a piece of paper this big and stick it up behind where you sit. Because I want it to be visible. I want the commitment to your one improvement to be something that everyone walks in and sees, and I can walk down the corridor and I can see it, and you're accountable. And I think one of the problems with endless digital dashboards is you only have to click once and it's lost on a sea of tabs, and that accountability can be kind of lost sometimes. And so that sort of physical signaling can be that kind of analog signaling. I think I miss that.
All right, so Georg, let's wrap up by talking about Phrase. Earlier this year on X, you posted Phrase will be the enterprise backbone that helps companies maximize the opportunities in the coming explosion of language. It sounds like the next Marvel movie. Tell us about being the backbone and what is this explosion of language?
Yeah, I think for me that thank you for reaching out. I think that sort of synthesizes and summarizes many of the ideas we've talked about today. So I think for me, the explosion of language is that kind of real-time internet and that billion-X explosion of just the volumes of content that are out there. I also think it's in the expectations of consumers. If it's possible to receive truly localized content, then one should. I'll give you an example. I love this example because it's not like an obvious one. Oftentimes when we think about localization, people go straight away to, marketing materials or the website has to be in 17 languages. So here's a less obvious one. A manufacturing client of ours that does lifts and escalators in like 100 countries around the world with 90,000 employees told me that they only localize out of English 1.7% of their content. So that means if they're hiring, training, and then sending field service engineers to an escalator or an elevator in Kuala Lumpur or Rio de Janeiro, they have to hire English-speaking field service engineers. So if you can localize that content internally, suddenly the CFO and the VP of field service engineering and the chief people officer have the ability to hire from a local language speaking talent pool, which means much more talent. And that's a good thing. That might do something for unit economics as well as availability of kind of a workforce, which means hopefully if you then also been able to train them because people learn better in their own language, fix right first time, et cetera, et cetera. Lots of benefits to a sort of traditional and, type company that isn't a digital company of localizing. So, explosion of language to me means the ability of the technology to do things that we haven't done before, do them with real quality that enables new use cases and volumes. And if we get all of that right, then you need the systems to do that in to all of our earlier points, in a way that manages quality, manages risk, allows for correct human review at the right stages according to, company policy or regulatory requirements. So come back to AI, workflow, and scale. Those are our 3 development mantras. And that's what I meant by that.
Well, Georg, it's been a great conversation. Thank you very much for joining us today. If folks wanted to find out more about you and your company, where's the best place to look?
Phrase.com or my Twitter and LinkedIn.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This has been The Great Digital Transformation with Gerard Zatvani. To participate in the conversation, go to gerardzatvani.com. The Great Digital Transformation is a production of Forbes Books.